Oh God, I don't even know where to begin because I'm not exceptional in the fact that I'll probably be one of the first of like bloody many to say that without Stan Lee I just wouldn't be the person that I am today. Obviously you look at what I kind of do as a job, it's all about comic books, and a lot of it, you look at the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe today as well, all of that would not have been possible without figures like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and John Romita and Steve Ditko.
You know when you initially find this sort of news out, and it's that sort of rush of every single thought at once, because someone like Stan Lee is instrumental to everything that, I mean, you know, you grow up with the characters that he creates. For me, I followed him for as long as I can remember. I remember him talking at the beginning of the old PS1 SpiderMan game from like 2000 or something, and just hearing his voice and being like, that's a cool voice. And he says at the beginning of the game, like, you know, Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee. And I remember looking him up and just like, you watch him in interviews and you watch him at Comic-Cons. I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but you just see him and he just irradiates this like sense of positivity and goodwill, and he was so together. He knew what his talents were and he knew what his strengths were, and like you can follow that whole thing. You can go down like the man, the person, the individual, and everything that he stood for, and that stuff is an endless well of reassurance if you just want like an idol and someone to look up to, and all those kind of attributes, just, you know, they'll last forever.
It's weird because I know a lot of people have because he's so vastly covered many different mediums over the course of his career, over the course of his life. A lot of people have a different tie to him. The one that really, really stands out for me though is like being a young kid and sort of, to say you hung around with like kids at school who like to play football or whatever. I did all that, but I still like doing like the quiet stuff, you know, like the going in the house and just disappearing at your own world, playing with toys and getting in your bedroom and just like lose yourself in a world of imagination. And Stan Lee really kind of, when I think about him, and I just, things like comics in general were just a completely mind-blown experience.
Without Stan Lee, there wouldn't be comic books to me, to be honest. All of my favourite comic book characters have in some way been affected by Stan Lee. So I could sit here and just list off all of the ones, like some people did yesterday on social media. But it isn't about just characters to me, what Stan Lee did. It was about what he did for comic book fans. So my favourite group of comic book characters are the X-Men. And without Stan Lee, they wouldn't have been what they are at all. Fundamentally, it was him that made them about a sort of civil rights issue, and about being outsiders who found a way to belong, which to me is what comic books were about, and they still are for a lot of people. You might have been a geek at school, which meant that you weren't like in with the in crowd, and comic books gave you an outlet where you could see people who weren't necessarily like perfect. So Daredevil was blind. Spider-Man before he was bitten by, Peter Parker before he was bitten by a spider was just a geek who had nothing exceptional about him. And the X-Men were mutants. They had things genetically wrong with them that made them outsiders to everybody else. And it was, in particular, the X-Men, and well, it was the animated TV show actually that got me when I was young.
You do the theme?
No, I could, yeah, but I'm not going to. It was that sort of message of you don't have to be perfect. I mean, I'm not terrible. Let's be honest. But it was like these people could be exceptional too, and without Stan Lee apparently having writer's block, that wouldn't have been a thing. He didn't know how to come up with an origin story for the X-Men, so he just said, oh, well, they're going to be born like that, and that became like the defining thing about the X-Men, and it still is to me. That's what sets them apart from people like Tony Stark's great, Captain America, great. They're all really good characters, but they're not the same. Being rich or being a Superman is not the same as being born in a way that makes you different. And to me, that is Stan Lee's message across all of his stories, and that's what he means to me. That's why he means so much to me.
It's so hard. It's so hard. I remember like last night, like getting the news, and you want to make a tweet, you want to sort of talk about it, but it's just this man's legacy and this man's history is so expansive, and it covers so many other like different mediums, like other people have mentioned already, no doubt. And it was just so hard to condense that into a couple of hundred characters, and it's even more difficult to condense it into this. But I guess what he means to me was like everyone said, it's that sense of place and sense of identity and sense of that you belong to something that you might not have felt before. Like, as a part of my childhood, he was like instrumental in sort of the, you know what the weird thing is, it was what Scott mentioned when he mentioned the PlayStation 1 Spider-Man game. And Stan Lee narrates that game. And when I think back to my childhood, I think about playing that game, I think about those characters, but I think about his voice being there, and that sort of the comfort that you took in knowing that Stan Lee was around.
But I actually have a really interesting story. Well, I think is an interesting story to tell, because I've been into comics more or less since I was very, very wee. My mum introduced them when I was a little child. And then I remember moving house, and one of the first things we got was Fox Kids, which is like a big thing. And I remember because I really wanted to watch the Spider-Man animated show, you know, with the Aerosmith theme in it. And there was an episode that I remember watching, which is probably my earliest memory of Stan Lee, and it's where Spidey actually hops into his universe and he takes him for a swing. And from that point on, I kind of like researched Stan Lee, and when I was in year 6, which is grade 6 for all you Americans out there, we were asked to do a paper on like people we really admired. So I did one on Stan Lee. I remember going onto his Wikipedia page and pretty much just printing the entire thing off and going from there. And that really is kind of where my obsession with comic books and all of that came through.
Spider-Man is incredibly like personal to me, because my childhood, I spent a lot of my childhood with my grandparents, because my parents were working really long hours. So I was always like raised with my grandparents and spent a lot of time around my granddad. And so like there's always that weird little hyper connection thing with like Peter Parker and the fact that he lives with Aunt May and Uncle Ben. And then stuff like, you know, the moral core of the Peter Parker character in Spider-Man, not doing the right thing, and obviously his Uncle Ben dies and stuff. And like even scenes like that in the first Sam Raimi movie really got me, because I'm already kind of projecting this weird connection onto like Parker and his relationship to this elderly couple that he lives with. So there's that thing with like, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, whatever the phrase is, like it's always been used in a million different ways. And it's arguably potentially cheesy or whatever, I don't care. I think that the moral core that's at the heart of Spidey, that Stan Lee wrote, is such a great way to live and be. And in terms of, you know, you think about the actions that you take in everyday life and the things that you can do to change a certain situation as it's unfolding, regardless of what it is. Parker always regretted not doing the right thing, and so I always think of that all the time, and that's why I try and do the best thing I can, regardless of the situation, and that all comes from Stan Lee, and it was always backed up by the real him and the stuff that he made. So it's Spidey means the most to me, and it always has, and it's the solid core that's in that character. But Stan Lee himself, you just watch any footage of him, he was such a great dude. He's such a wholesome, just lovable guy, and it's obviously a loss. But it's the way that I always process like grief stuff is I don't think of the loss, I think of the gain, everything that we gain from him being here, and there's infinite amounts of that, whether that's childhood memories or life lessons or whatever. So it's just going to be a thank you to everything that he gave us.
Like my dad was really into comics, and he kind of wanted me to share that with him, so it was kind of something we did together. And he used to love going to car boot sales, and we'd go to car boot sales and he'd buy a bunch of old comics. None of it made sense because you couldn't get them in order. Yeah. So it was just whatever, he just bought whatever ones. But I didn't care. You put them down, and honestly, like the hours I must have lost reading those comic books are just, but they were like the best. Like you'd start at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it'd be nighttime, and I'd have just been sat in my room, like living in my own world, just doing nothing, but having the best time. And like, I think I've sent a tweet out about this. Like, Spider-Man for me was the one that was like the very first one where I was like, holy shit, this guy is amazing. Look at this guy, shoots webs out of his hands and all this kind of thing. And it was just like the story of Peter as well, because I was just a young kid at the time, so that was kind of really resonating to me. So a man who can come up with that, and I know obviously there's more than just Stan Lee, but Stan Lee is like a beacon when it comes to this kind of thing, and it just feels really weird to think that that isn't going to be around anymore, to be honest. It's really sad. Immediately, and sort of stupidly, my brain kind of went to that part where I immediately thought, I'm not going to get another Stan Lee cameo. And that's kind of sad, man. That's like, and that shouldn't be the one thing I think about, but because he's such a presence, because he's such a great character, because he's such a great all-round everything, like to me personally and to many others I'm sure, like for him to not be present while the rest of this universe is going to continue to expand is probably more mind-blowing than me sitting in that room as a young kid reading those comics for the first time.
I remember, again, a few years ago when he announced his final UK convention appearance. And I remember that like hit me as hard as anything else, because it was a reminder that this guy is, you know, he's done a lot, he is getting old, and it was the first time I realized, man, I'm never gonna get to meet Stan Lee. You know, I'm never gonna get to like sort of thank him for all of the everything he's sort of done for me without kind of knowing. And I remember that was really hard, and now the fact that Stan Lee's gone is difficult, like for everyone to sort of deal with, but I suppose it is comforting to know that, you know, that was always a pipe dream anyway. His legacy and what he means to you on a sort of more than just a tangible level is what's important. It's that thinking back to the childhood and hearing his voice as a sort of grandfatherly figure. There was the feeling when you went to see the Avengers for the first time. I remember driving to the theatre after school one day to watch the Avengers, and obviously, you know, he didn't like direct those movies or anything, but he co-created those characters. He helped bring that universe to life, and without him, I wouldn't have had that same feeling going to see that movie like I would anything else. And genuinely, as potentially as sad as it sounds, like the feeling I got watching that movie, the feeling I got seeing Stan Lee pop up in the recent SpiderMan game was, it's just it gives you a feeling. That's all I've got right now. But it's just yeah, I like, I don't know.
What does Stan Lee mean to me personally is the way he told his stories. You know, he really founded the Marvel Universe. Not just him specifically, obviously, but when he really took the reins in the 60s, he founded the Marvel Universe on the idea of reflecting the world outside of our windows. You know, he wasn't about telling stories of alien super gods from beyond the cosmos, or like demented bat billionaire boys who are obsessed with like gothic architecture. He wanted to tell a story of Peter Parker, who was just a kid who was ostracized at high school. He wanted to tell a story about the X-Men as a metaphor for the civil rights movement. He told absolutely incredible ideas, like the stuff with the Fantastic Four and everything. And pop culture wouldn't be what it is today without Stan Lee. And for that I owe an eternal gratitude, but also the way his stories have informed me as an adult and what I get to do every time I wake up is something I'll be ever grateful for, and kind of the way that's not only impacted my life, but my parents' lives, and then, you know, everyone else across the globe. I think he was an amazing generalissimo, which is what he called himself, and I'm forever a true believer, so I'll end it on that. So thank you, Stan Lee. I hope you're sleeping well.